Hey guys, it's CS Joseph, csjoseph.life. Do another episode for season 19. This is season 19, episode 15, or how to cognitively develop. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about how the ISFP archetype, also known as the Druid, can literally become the best Druid it can possibly be for itself and others. So let's get down to it. So according to the type grid, the Druid type, also known as the ISFP, is a background communication style. This means informative, responding, and outcome. They're very outcome focused. They're not going to be spending much time or effort on things that if they're not going to get the outcome that they're looking for. Remember also that they're very interest based with their temperament, also known as their disposition. To be interest-based is that they're aware of what they're getting out of situations, and if they're not getting the outcome that they're looking to get out of a situation, they're probably not going to get anything done. And this is one of the reasons why their virtue and vice, according to season 7 playlist on the YouTube channel, is basically being like the most diligent person ever versus the most idle person in the world. And while INFPs oftentimes are accused of being the laziest of all the types, quite frankly, the answer is actually ISFPs. Interesting how they're both FI heroes. And INFPs, don't get me wrong, can be absolutely depraved and lazy, and as much as other NPs definitely can be. The ISFP definitely takes the cake. And just a little refresher, the reason why is that their FI hero requires them to create something that has meaning. And it's really hard for an ISFP, really hard for a Druid to extract that necessary meaning that they're looking for on a day-to-day job. So this is why an ISFP, if they're not directly involved in the creative process, if they're not the ones running the assembly line, if they're just another grunt on the ground and whatnot, they feel less special. And because of that lack of special that they feel, they basically decide to not engage. This is why when you hire somebody, like say for example you're a film director, like you're an ENFJ film director, and you hire an ISFP, if they don't necessarily buy into your vision, if they don't buy into the meaning behind the work that you're trying to put forward, that ISFP is just going to treat that job on your film crew like just another job. It's just their 9 to 5. They're just punching in, doing the least possible amount of effort that it takes to actually get done, and they're going to go home and go on their way and forget about everything that they did on the job that day because it's not even relevant to them to begin with. And this is typically how ISFPs behave. However, using an anecdote, I did have the pleasure of working with an ISFP at one point in time who ran my assembly line when I ran a company. So, but I hired an ISFP shop manager to manage our shop and to run our assembly line. And to him, firearms and weaponry was an art, and building all of them, it was an art form. He was always looking for every possible way to min-max the manufacturing process to make the product absolutely good. Because from his point of view, his extroverted thinking inferior function, which is right here, which is his need to have status and draw meaning, because they're linked together with introverted feeling a hero, which is morality, but it's also where a person has a personal sense of not necessarily well-being, I would say a personal sense of well-meaning. And based on that well-meaning sense, as an ISFP, whenever he produced a weapon that came out of our shop, it was like he was putting his own name on it. It's like he was saying, this weapon, this particular unit will do the job, exactly everything we promised, and possibly then some. I even remember this guy, he took his work so seriously that he actually would do house calls for some of our customers. If for some reason that they would call in and complain that there was something wrong with the weapon, he would literally drive out there to their home and actually work on the gun in their home and get it fixed up and built and everything, and go even further for them because he wanted to absolutely make sure for a fact that this weapon was definitely going to do what he claimed to do, because he took his reputation very seriously when it came to the weapons that we would make. And it was absolutely a true joy to see. And taking him to the Washington Arms Collectors, which were basically like these trade shows. A whole bunch of people would show up, would get a bunch of tables, throw all their weaponry, on tables, and we just buy, sell, trade guns. but it was just amazing to see how diligent this ISFP would work. And I definitely maintain that he was well on his way towards the path to enlightenment. And another ISFP that I had the pleasure of meeting and knowing was also my former father-in-law, very diligent worker. He actually bought himself a 40-acre farm, has it on the middle of the mountains, and is 100% self-sufficient. And anything that he would create, his landscape, his ponds, his excavators that he would get, solar run, everything, grow his own food, 100% self-sufficient, and everything that he did on that farm was an expression of the meaning that he found from his work. And I've never seen someone work so hard in my entire life. And every single day, he just gets up, he's in the sun, he's in his shop, he's working hard every day because he's able to extract the most meaning for his life, basically. And that's, for the most part, the purpose of the life of an ISFP is to literally extract as much meaning as possible from the work and the creations of their hands. And sometimes that could be like creating the ultimate system. And that's one of the things about my shop manager when he was working for us at North Sound Armory. He actually, he did create the ultimate system. He fine-tuned our assembly line so perfectly that he could literally tell us exactly how much was in inventory, how many weapons we could build from said inventory, how long it would take, how many people it would take, and he'd literally have it down to, like hours per unit or even minutes per unit per se if we'd actually line them up. And this guy, he could crank out about 7 to 8 weapons a day by himself, just literally going through the entire manufacturing process. It was incredible what we were able to do. And I really owe it to this guy to really getting down to the brass tacks. I honestly couldn't have done it without him. It was amazing watching him work and his diligence, and I was very happy to pay him. I was very grateful, and you could tell that he loved his job. It was the most important thing to him, and he really wanted to take us to the big time. And I really regret not being able to, really see that dream, when we were an arms dealer, arms manufacturing company, to really take it to the next level and utilize this ISFP to the absolute fullest measure we possibly could have. The bottom line is that the diligence of this man is definitely something that anyone could literally create a company around. And from right now, he's just creating cabinetry as a carpenter, and hired by a few companies thereof. But if I ever had the opportunity, I would give him a call and be like, yo, hey, let's get work on your dream again and let's get back into the business. And he'd be in it in a heartbeat, But that's the kind of diligence that can come from the virtue of the ISFP. And it really comes through them living out their purpose in life, which is to basically use their creative forces to build the ultimate system, to build or discover or find the ultimate methodology that provides the most meaning to them personally, but also conveys the best possible experience that someone else could have, that someone else could utilize, that creates the ultimate outcome or the ultimate result. And that's really telling of ENTJ subconscious and what its purpose is, because it's able to go a lot further as a result. So anyway, Druids are also very pragmatic. They're very independent. They have a really strong connection with nature. Probably some of the most natural of all the types. I would say so, even more so than the Paladin. They have a real strong connection with nature, probably the most out of everyone that I've personally seen. I think because of that, they're, as a Wayfarer type, they're able to really demonstrate the highest level of freedom and freedom of expression out of anyone. And I guess that comes out in their art. I mean, when you look at art pieces like this, for example, this is actually created by an ISFJ, and this one over here was actually created by an INFJ. It'd be nice to have some ISFP art on my wall. But ISFPs, well, it's not really, while they don't really do as much in the abstract, I have noticed them go super, super far into, creating works of art, maybe even on sketches, and where they're able to take what is there and actually really bring it to life. And from an ISFP standpoint, the way they approach life like they have a green thumb. It's all about bringing life to life, basically making life lush itself. keeping that river flowing, making sure that things are growing basically in their lives and in the lives of other people. And they're not necessarily aware of this because they're like druids, and druids have the green thumb, and druids can make things grow, and they're able to do that. The problem is that if they're not doing it on their own terms, that they don't have the freedom to do that, it actually leads to a form of death. And then all of a sudden you have the river stops flowing. It becomes a deadly marsh, for example. And, all of plants and fish and animals and insects, they all die basically within this life area, and this life force that the druid type, the ISFP, has cultivated. Actually, is not only is it meaningless, but it's dead. It's all full of death, and that's basically what the ISFP's purpose in life is to really bring life to where there may be death, but sometimes they feel powerless to do so. It could be because they're afraid. It could be because they're irresponsible. It could be because they're prideful. It could be because they just lack self-mastery entirely. And this is indicative of their path to enlightenment that we would see with typically all the types. Because remember, you have the four sides of the mind. You have the ego ISFP, you have the ENTJ subconscious, the ESFJ unconscious, and the INTP superego. Each of these four sides of the mind are actually disintegrated. They're not actually together at all. And this can actually cause a lot of problems because of the lack of togetherness, because of the disunity. And a person's life, their entire life, from birth all the way to death, is literally a process of bringing these four personalities together and bringing them together as one, in full unity, in full unison. And this is all available to ISFPs. The problem is that there are cognitive gateways that need to be adhered. And I've used the farming example in past lectures where, each foresight of your mind is basically a farm that you're tilling, etc. And then you have this spirit energy or water that you use to water various crops, and you're able to get certain yields from that. And that still rings true here. And then, but this is done through cognitive gateways. And the cognitive gateways is your hero function, is your inferior function, is your villain function, and it is your demon function. And gaining a level of mastery over these cognitive gateways is absolutely necessary. And there are two ways to use a cognitive gateway. You can do it in an orderly fashion, or you can do it in a chaotic fashion. And then as a result of doing that, it has different results. It has different outcomes that come as a result of using these four personalities, etc. A lot of people ask me, today I'm an ISFP, but sometimes I feel like an ISFJ, or today I'm an ISFP, but sometimes I feel like an ESFP. That's not true. The reality of the situation is that they have cognitive transitions where you have an ISFP ego where a person is, and then by the time they hit adolescence, their superego starts development. At adolescence, this is the superego is where a person's sin nature exists. It's where the human condition exists. Human's propensity to do evil exists. And it starts really getting into its main development phase at adolescence, and it changes the ego's approach. The reason why is because the superego is trying to replace the ego. And the reason why is also the same reason as to why the four sides of the mind are disintegrated. And they're disintegrated because the superego is the most powerful side of the four sides. And while the ego is very powerful, the superego is far more powerful. It's actually superfluous. It's kind of like a parasite that's attached to the rest of the mind and is trying to take over. The reason why it's trying to take over is because it has no respect for the ego. It thinks the ego is irresponsible. It has no respect for the subconscious. It thinks the subconscious is prideful and arrogant. It has no respect for the unconscious. It sees the unconscious as very foolish. And as a result of that, the superego is not interested in integrating with the rest of the mind. And this can cause a lot of problems. This is where we have the ISFPs who are super irresponsible and end up being in cognitive loops between their hero function and their child function, where they're so focused on doing only what their mood is and only what they want. And they're willing to sacrifice other human beings for the sake of what they want and their freedom of choice. And it doesn't matter what damage, what collateral damage is being caused to other people through SE parent, because in order for anyone to make a choice, it has consequences to other people in the moment, and that could create potential collateral damage. But because they have expert intuition trickster, the ISFP is not aware of the consequences of their actions. And quite frankly, folks, for the most part, SP types really have no clue as to what the consequences of their actions are. Although it's funny, when it comes to ISPs that have NE trickster, they actually think or believe that they can anticipate the consequences to their actions because they're NI child. But the reality situation is they really can't. And this is why ISPs, you find ISPs more in the casino than any of the other types, because their NE trickster, for some reason, causes them to believe that they have unlimited luck, which is not necessarily far away from the truth, because their NI child is the luckiest of all of the cognitive functions, and it's as if they have luck, but the reality situation is that just no, they're just able to get through the minefield of life because their NI child has this divinity about it where it can actually find any path to move forward. But for some reason, their NE trickster takes over, and all of a sudden they think they actually have luck, and they end up being these mindless zombies pressing a button over and over at the slot machine at the casino in Vegas, completely wasting their time. And then eventually spending all their winnings on super fast cars, drugs, alcohol, as if it has any value to them, whatever. And then it's like, well, hey, I'm extracting some meaning here for myself. No, actually, you're not. You're just being like a selfish pig. But that's another thing. So anyway, the point is that, sometimes because ISFPs predominantly are not aware of the consequence of their actions, they end up, because their FI and their NI is immaturely in a loop with one another, this can actually cause some serious collateral damage to other people. And this is how the superego views the ego. It views the ego as something that's very irresponsible. And the reason why is because the first gateway is the hero function. It doesn't have the parent between the hero and the child. Because the hero likes to pick up the child and take the child and fly around and save the world and show the child the ropes, basically, like a sidekick almost. But the parent likes to get in the way of the hero and be like, listen, hero, stop doing this. You're teaching the child bad habits. You're also causing a lot of collateral damage. You're actually harming other children while you're out there saving the world. You need to be more responsible. And the hero's like, okay, yeah, that's true. I actually do need to be responsible. And then the hero function starts to realize that, oh crap, I'm being irresponsible. I need to be responsible. And then the parent function starts to develop, because the ISFP, as they're getting older, as they're starting to take responsibility, starts to realize that their freedom of choice could actually have negative consequences for other people. And then they start to realize that their freedom of choice could actually be selfish, right? And it's no wonder ESFJs are the golden pair, because ESFJs often accuse ISFPs of being selfish. But it's also interesting because ESFJs go out of their way to make ISFPs feel special, right? And it can actually be an enabling behavior, because ISFPs are all about trying to feel special, trying to feel meaningful, because if they don't feel special, if they don't feel that form of meaning, then they're not going to even bother doing anything. Their NI child will just turn off. It's just like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do any of this. Why do I want to do this? I don't want to do this. I'm not getting any status out of this. My freedom is being taken away. I don't care about your experience because I'm not getting a choice. And I'm not in the mood for doing this because what am I getting out of it? And ISFPs don't realize that they can actually come off super selfish that way, because it's like, oh, I'm only going to make a decision based on my mood, and I'm only going to make a decision based on what I want, right? And as long as if it doesn't increase my status or feeling of meaning, well, then I don't care. And they can actually come off as very selfish. They can end up shirking their responsibility and realize that they're giving other people bad experiences. For example, I know an ISFP who is insanely diligent in World of Warcraft. Very diligent. He's been playing World of Warcraft for 6 or 7 years. It's unbelievable. I mean, like, shoot, are they like at level cap 120 nowadays? Maybe 130? I have no idea. I think it's 120. And he's got multiple 120s and constantly raiding and doing PvP all the time. And for what? I mean, he used to have a really nice job working for a multi-million-dollar company. He actually used to work for me at one point in time. He's the person who created my very first version of csjoseph.life, and instead he just decided to live in a trailer and play World of Warcraft. Lost his job to this dopamine addiction of his, and that job where he wasn't really able to extract any meaning, and got to a point where it's like, okay, well, what are you gonna do? Are you gonna take some responsibility? No. Instead, he just wanted to play WoW in his trailer, and waited till all of his money ran out, and then he was forced to get a job, so he decided to work at a Dollar General. Woohoo! Very aspirational of you, Mr. ISFP, who's actually insanely skilled in the world of information technology and have been hired by multi-million dollar companies to actually accomplish things. But, hey, it wasn't the meaning that he could get. For some reason, he was drawing far more meaning, out of playing World of Warcraft and being irresponsible, regardless of the fact that he was becoming a burden on other people. And that's what ISFPs do when they're irresponsible. They selfishly use their freedom of choice, which gives other people a bad experience, which causes them to be a burden, and then they decide to put their heads in the sand and deny that it actually happens, because if an ISFP actually has to talk about what happened, they would have to admit that it's real. And then, oh crap, I've admitted that real. Well, that means I have to take responsibility, if I admit it's real, but they won't admit it. Here's the thing. ISFPs are literally those people that put their hands over their eyes and are like, oh, well, because I can't see you, you can't see me. And they literally live their life like this. Like, you'll never find anyone that's more ignorance is bliss, potentially, than an ISFP. And yet they're insanely manipulative as well, but we'll get to that in a second. But the point is that they selfishly use their freedom of choice, and it causes them to become a burden through their SE parent. This is where their parent is, like, when it's really irresponsible, it causes them to be a burden. And they end up becoming a burden on other people. And this is what this ISFP did. Finally, after a while, he got tired of being a burden and instead picked up a nicer job and was a pretty cool guy, forklift operator and some other things. And he ended up being in charge of, I think, an assembly line, an entire supply chain situation, and running a warehouse. Even ran over a woman with his forklift who, for some reason, became his girlfriend. NI child. Like, seriously, NI child. So, the point is, he eventually found his way. He eventually became responsible, as a result. And then he is no longer a burden on other people. And he was able to get over his addiction to World of Warcraft. And, which, thank God, he was able to do that. Because I really like the guy. Although, for some reason, he's, like, really afraid of talking to me. Gee, I wonder why. Probably it's because he doesn't want to be subject to the whim of TI parent for his little TE inferior. Because I guarantee you, folks, if he ever did face me one day, I would absolutely crush him like a bug. Because he needs it. It's for his own good. Because, sorry, if you just randomly ghost me when after promising me that you would deliver something, well, that's just the way it is. But doesn't mean, I have a problem with him. I actually really like the guy, and I'd kind of want him back in my life, actually, because I like ISFPs. They're fantastic. They create very amazing things. We're a bronze pair, you know what I'm saying, within our compatibility. It'd be nice if he had the guts to actually, admit that he did something wrong, and then all of a sudden it's real, and then he has to take full responsibility for it, and then he is actually making the choice with his NI child to come to me with any hero. Of course, my FE child would have mercy on him. Of course. All he would have to do is actually admit that he did something wrong. That's it. That's all I want from the guy. But he's not willing to do that because his FI hero does not want to feel bad. He doesn't want to acknowledge that he did something wrong, because if he does, he would have to come to terms with his feelings, and he would actually have to be okay with feeling bad. So anyway, in this particular case, though, within this example, he actually stopped becoming a burden on other people. He got his own place, his own job, his own car. He stopped playing World of Warcraft. And now, he has a sexual relationship, and wow, I wonder how that happened. You know what I mean? And hashtag NI child, and now he's pretty well off, and that's fantastic. Good for him. He's no longer a burden on other people. He's producing more than he's consumed, and from the mature masculine standpoint, he's achieved king. Congratulations, good sir. I'm very pleased about this. And based on that, he has fulfilled the first requirement towards enlightenment, although technically it's not a way of achievement, because the path to enlightenment is not about achievement. It's about continuous improvement. It's about Kaizen. The Japanese concept of Kaizen, it means continuous improvement. So he will have to continuously improve his sense of personal responsibility, which comes as a result of utilizing his hero function in an orderly manner instead of a chaotic manner. A chaotic hero produces a sense of irresponsibility. This is where you get men who have Peter Pan syndrome. Oh, I don't want to grow up. Because if they grow up, then all of a sudden they have to take responsibilities. I actually posted something recently on Facebook, and what I posted on Facebook is where I basically said, I became a man the day I realized that, I have to take responsibility for things that are not actually my fault. Because I used to live life like this, where if it wasn't my fault, it was not my responsibility. And the thing is, that's very childish. That's actually the thinking of a man-child. And I put that thinking behind me. I had an epiphany one time in Vegas, and it just kind of hit me all at once within the span of like 2 or 3 minutes, and just like a whole new life perspective occurred at that moment. And this is one of the lessons I gained from that epiphany, is that sometimes as a man, I have to take responsibility for things that are not actually my fault. And that's what this ISFP did. He started taking responsibility for things that weren't exactly his fault. And then as a result of that, he stopped becoming a burden. He stopped making decisions solely based on his mood and what he wants, and realized that he has a responsibility to make other people comfortable around him and not be a burden on them himself, right? Which is absolutely fantastic. This is one of the telltale signs of a mature, responsible ISFP, is if that ISFP is 100% self-sufficient and not a burden on other people. Again, another example, my former father-in-law, who is an ISFP, fantastic fellow, he is an example of 100% self-sufficiency. He doesn't want to rely on anyone. He doesn't want to be obligated to anyone, because he realized through his SI critic that it is wise to not be, necessarily dependent on anyone. But more on that later, okay? So let's move on to the second gateway. The second gateway is attached to the inferior function, which is extroverted thinking. ISFPs are afraid, and when you use the second gateway in a chaotic manner, when they're trying to, reach the path of enlightenment, right now this ISFP that we're talking about has achieved the first gateway, which is personal responsibility. But when it comes to TE inferior, the ISFP can be very arrogant, very conceited, and they can sometimes even come off as a know-it-all. They're very judgmental towards other people. In some cases, ISFPs can come to believe, because extroverted thinking is all about belief, they can come to believe that they're actually better than other people or more capable than other people, especially if they're extroverted sensing. It's like they view themselves like it's kind of like if you want something done right, do it yourself. Although I would say that ISTPs are far more involved in that. But ISFPs are afraid of other people thinking less of them. So they go out of their way to overcompensate with status or symbols of status whenever possible, because they're just afraid of their opinion not mattering. They're afraid of not having a voice. And sometimes ISFPs go out of the way to overperform as much as possible. They overperform because they end up believing mistakenly that overperformance equals status. The problem is that doesn't always work. And I understand that ISFPs are very, interest-based. They're aware of what they get out of a situation versus what somebody else gets out from a situation. So it is a responsibility for an ISFP to create a win-win situation where they win out of a situation versus somebody else who wins out of a situation. However, in the absence of communication or explanation, perceptions become reality. And an ISFP is aware of this through their TE inferior. So they can actually cause other people to make other people think that the ISFP is capable, when the reality situation, the ISFP is not capable. Or, here's another actual daily example, the ISFP can look like they're working, even though they're not actually working. And because they're not drawing any meaning or feeling special with their job, so they're rather going to spend more effort to look like they're working than actually getting any work done. Be very careful when you hire an ISFP, because you better make for absolute sure that they really care with their FI hero about what it is they're doing for you. Be very careful, okay? Because after a while, it creates this sort of this apathy, kind of like how INTPs can become apathetic, but the reality situation is they're just trying to make other people think that they're working in this form of extroverted thinking manipulation. And it's because they realize that after a while, overperforming for other people doesn't exactly always pay off, because for some reason an ISFP assumes that everyone else thinks just like them, and that if they overperform, that means they're going to be overly rewarded through overperformance. But that's not exactly how the world works. And then when the ISFP realizes that, they become very disenfranchised. And then all of a sudden their desire to work goes down and their idleness goes up. They become very idle. It's all about looking like they're actually being productive, when the reality situation is they're not actually being productive. The thing is, though, is that if they eventually get caught or exposed, well, then that's a serious issue. So their TE inferior, their greatest fear is fear of being shamed publicly. And one of the best ways to actually cause an ISFP to hate you is to actually shame them publicly and expose the fact that they're being idle and lazy, and expose the fact that they're just looking like they're working when the reality situation is they're not actually working. Expose them. The problem is that because they're SE parent, they can usually get away with not being exposed because they're so good at making things look like something through their creativity that it's really, really hard to pinpoint them sometimes. And they can actually be really sly about it, and you don't actually know what's going there. And again, it all comes down to a fear of lost status, a fear of other people thinking less of them. And this can actually create a lot of pride. And because of that fear of status, they end up becoming very impulsive. And this is when the ISFP takes pride in, either their achievements, the brand name clothing that they're wearing, or the kinds of tools that they use when they're working, the model, the make and model and year of their truck that they're driving, or even their car. Gosh, I remember an ISFP telling me all about their Corvette and how it was like the greatest thing in the world. I'm like, dude, it's just a Corvette. Like, there's better cars, dude. And he's like, no, it's the greatest car in the world. I'm like, okay, dude, sure, But they end up becoming prideful, and they end up making really poor purchasing decisions. Honestly, I don't really know a single ISFP that's actually good at money. I just don't. I mean, I thought I did. I'm wrong. ISFPs and spending money? Ha! No, sorry. That's like a serious issue. Like ISFPs and spending, because they get so arrogant with, I can always make more money. I can go into debt because I'm capable enough that I'll find a way. I can always dig myself out of this hole, right? And so they're like, they're willing to borrow money, from that shady guy who's probably going to shake them down later with thugs or whatever, and go into debt and take that risk, right? Because they're lucky, right? They're gonna take that role, and they end up becoming prideful in it. So prideful that they have this particular slot machine that just speaks to them, for some reason. And that's their lucky slot machine, etc. It's just so weird, even though it's bullshit. But they actually believe this. And they end up getting themselves deeper and deeper and deeper into debt. And then they cover it up with this pride of, well, I can do whatever I want. When the reality situation is that once again they're becoming a burden yet again. And it's all because of this pride. They're covering up the fact that they don't actually know anything. And they're afraid that other people are going to find out that they don't know anything. And that's what really bothers them, is because they know they have to be a performer. They just want other people to think that they're a performer. And sometimes the ISFP can get away with hey, as long as they think that I'm good at performance, that's all that matters. I don't actually have to perform well as long as they think it, And that's not exactly, the best approach. But ISFPs do it all the time, and it's because it's like I'm just going to do whatever I want. I don't care what you think about it, And then sometimes they do care what they think because they're afraid of other people thinking less of them. And it's that fear that comes from using this gateway into their subconscious through cognitive transition. The hero is the gateway to the ego, but the inferior function is the gateway into the subconscious, and that can cause a lot of problems for them. Not good. Not good at all. So here's the issue, is that when they start using their extroverted thinking inferior function in aspirational mode, when they actually start taking charge and realizing, hey, maybe I shouldn't be spending this money, they become less impulsive. And if you notice, the parent function of the subconscious starts to develop. And because this NI is no longer a child, but it's actually a parent, when they're using their subconscious, they're actually far more responsible. Which means they don't care so much about those lucky slot machines anymore. They don't care about what brands look good. They actually care about what brands actually get the work done. You know? I don't know how many times, like, I've had so many ISFPs swear by certain brands of tools, and then, like, I had this cheap off-brand that they didn't like, but then all their tools would break, but my tools would actually, like, last. And it would happen all the time. And it wasn't until after a while they actually saw me doing that, and then I ended up getting, you know, more pats on the back from my boss based on my decisions, based on the tools that I would get. They decided to get the same tools that I got, right? Because they want that status too. They saw me getting, you know, those attaboys. They want them attaboys too, right? So then they all of a sudden get the same tools that I got, even though they're like cheap off-brand, but they work. You see what I'm saying? But, you know, hey, you know, everything's got to be DeWalt. You know, everything's got to be Makita. Everything's got to be, you know, Craftsman. You know, everything's got to be Craftsman. Like, what the hell? Why did they get rid of that lifetime warranty anyway? Like, that sucks. But that's a whole other discussion. Yes, I'm showing my, you know, my blue collar roots there. You know what I'm saying? Everyone thinks I'm like some white collar person, but reality, actually, I'm a very blue collar person. I grew up in blue collar, been underneath houses doing HVAC work, been on assembly lines. I've been out in the cold, been in the ditch, handled a lot more things out there than most people realize. But hey, you know, I am just, you know, trying to be like a more complete human being with steadfastness and perseverance. So the ISFP, they realize that being responsible of what they want and being less impulsive, while being impulsive can make them look like a high roller, you know, being impulsive, which ends up leading them into debt, which causes people to think less of them later. But they live so much in the moment that they want to look like that high roller, right? They're willing to go into debt for it, which screws them over later, which will cause other people to think less of them later. Maybe they should be willing to not be afraid of people thinking less of them now, thinking that they're a schlub, for example, when they show up at the casino. Maybe they shouldn't even be at the casino in the first place, but that's a whole other discussion, right? And then as a result of that, they become they become less impulsive because they humble themselves. The ISFP has finally humbled themselves to the point where they realize, you know what? I don't have that much status. I'm not really that great. People think I'm dumb, probably because it's true. I don't actually know that much. I don't spend enough time researching. I don't, you know, I make decisions based on the brand instead of actually looking into whether or not the product actually works. Then after a while, they start to become, you know, less impulsive, and they make decisions based on what they want, and they make better decisions. They decide that what they desire is to not look like a high roller, but be patient enough to become a high roller later, a real actual one, because they realize that they need to be, you know, their status needs to convey the reality of the situation. And if they're unhappy with their status, that they make responsible decisions where they're not a burden on others, where they're not being impulsive with their NI child, such that they actually become this person who becomes a high roller because they've been more responsible. But, you know, good luck finding a financially responsible ISFP. That's super hard because, you know, sometimes they just can't help themselves because I'm in the mood for this thing and I really want to buy it, so I'm going to buy it right now. Or I really want to look good, you know, at this reunion or whatever, or I want to look good at this meeting or whatever, so I'm going to buy it now and I'll just return it later. But then they forget to do it, and then they don't, and then they can't return it, and then they're in debt. Wow. You know? All because of fear of status. If they just accept that they actually are a person of low status first, then they can actually build their status over time and have real status instead of the fake status of just looking like a high roller, looking like they're a top performer, when the reality situation is they're just a schlub. Getting to the point where they actually accept that they're a schlub and then work hard to not be a schlub anymore, then they will aspire with their extroverted thinking and theory. It'll become aspirational. They become super really good at their money. They make proper purchasing decisions. They don't make decisions based on the brand. They make decisions based on the effectiveness. And then all of a sudden it contributes to them not being a burden on other people. And then people see them as somebody who is dependable. People see them as somebody who is very capable and reliable, someone who can lead and take charge, someone who is trustworthy. Like I trusted that ISFP shop manager with my assembly line when we were making firearms. Think of all the safety rules and regulations that you have to go through and all the legalities of running a firearms manufacturing company. It's super complicated AF. But he figured it out because it had some meaning to him. The thing is, though, the ISFP needs to realize they're not going to have any meaning in their life until they realize that they're meaningless already. You have to come to terms with your own meaninglessness so that you can actually explore the meaningful and become meaningful. If you're constantly trying to look meaningful, you're not actually spending any time and effort on actually becoming meaningful in reality. So instead, you're just nothing more than a fake walking fairy tale. Oh, thank you, little druids. No wonder the druid class within World of Warcraft is the shapeshifter. They're always trying to look like something else. You know what I'm saying? Think about that, guys. Think about it. Always trying to look like something else instead of actually taking on the responsibility, taking on the humility of actually becoming that thing that they wish they were through the hard work, or instead of fakely looking like it. ISFPs, if there's anything you ever learned from me, it's this. Never believe in the adage or the saying, fake it until you make it. If you keep trying to fake it until you make it, your life will literally be a living hell, and you will not get anywhere in life. Keep that in mind. So after a while, this particular ISFP finally humbled themselves and realized they were not all that in a bag of chips. They accepted that they are actually a person of low status and they are meaningless. And then because of that, they developed and started making decisions that actually made them more meaningful. And then because they're no longer afraid. And then as a result, people come to them, people think highly of them. They're able to show other people how to think about things differently and provide very valuable input. The ISFP is the most valuable voice among their peers, such that they are actually seen as a leader instead of a grunt, and then actually put in charge of the assembly line or the projects or the warehouse or what have you, to be able to actually contribute as a top performer, an actual top performer in whatever team or business or industry or whatever it is their hands find to do. It could even be a marriage, right? Same thing. Now, the third gateway is your extroverted feeling. Sometimes ISFPs worry that they're not being caring enough. They worry that they're careless, and it's because they innately know that they are very selfish and making decisions based on their moods. But they also worry about other people having moods as well, because, hey, I make decisions based on my mood. That means someone else could potentially be making decisions based on their mood. And other people's moods may adversely affect me, right? And their other people's moods may actually get in the way of my freedom of choice, my freedom of choice. Other people's moods may get in the way of my titles, my status, and because of that, moods can get in the way. And the mood, hey, my boss might be in a bad mood today, and this is the day I'm supposed to be getting a promotion. I may not get a promotion because he's in a bad mood, and he's really worried about it, Then he overcompensates with it. And then because he's worried about other people making those decisions, worried about other people not valuing this ISFP decides to become disloyal. Or this ISFP decides to just stop caring. For example, in a business, there's an ISFP IT director, and this particular ISFP who was an IT director, he was very fantastic what he did, very much took charge. It came time for him to, another company actually bought his company that he was at. They were trying to look at him at possibly becoming a director. And he got so worried that he was going to be passed up for the promotion that he ended up deciding that he was disloyal to the organization and started talking mad shit about this organization behind their back, even though that's not actually how he felt about them, but he started doing it anyway because he was so worried. And then other people ended up hearing about it, and then he ended up not being chosen for the promotion, and he ended up ultimately being laid off and lost his position entirely. All because he was worried about whether or not they actually valued him, even though he was the absolute best person that they had on their team at this particular health conglomerate organization. But hey, that's the thing. And he ended up allowing that worry to cause his SI critic, to cause him to become disloyal. And he became very foolish. Gosh, if you guys ever want to see something interesting, ISFPs, they always talk mad smack about you behind your back. Watch out. And if you think it's bad with ISFPs, wait till you hear INFPs. But ISFPs, especially when it comes to them competing for higher positions of status, or competing for tools, or competing for knickknacks, or objects, or toys, or achievements in World of Warcraft, or the red Karaji mount from Encourage 40-man in the original World of Warcraft Classic, and you gotta have that cool red mount because it's so rare and it's a nice status symbol. Competition for status symbols. They worry that other people will not value them enough to give them those status symbols that they so desperately want, which then causes them to behave foolish. And when they were loyal, or at least steadfast in their ability to be a top performer, then they stop performing, or they start talking mad shit about everyone behind their back, and or they start creating rumors, right? They'll create rumors about other people or cause people to think about other things. I had an ISFP in my life recently who became so worried that her husband would not value her anymore. She became so worried that her husband did not get value in her that she actually came to me, was speaking mad trash about him behind his back, and then even went so far as to insinuate that I should leave my wife to be in a relationship with her when her and her husband would not even work out. When I know her husband very well, and her husband absolutely would never leave her. He's so diehard loyal to her, he would sacrifice his life for his wife, right? And as much as I would for Railgun. And I was insanely insulted by this behavior. But it came as a result of her being worried about whether or not her husband actually values her. Wow. And that worry just caused her to become disloyal to him, right? It's no wonder how ISFPs, gosh, when they're in relationships, they have a tendency of cheating a lot. A lot of people don't realize this. Sometimes, and it's kind of interesting how FIT users often, especially Wayfarer types, they end up having the reputation, and men do this too, this is not just women, and in some cases it's actually worse with men in certain areas, especially like in areas of business. Basically, it's like, hey, I'm going to sleep with this person to gain a higher level of status, etc. It's like basically a form of whoredom or hoeing around, basically. And it's because of this worry about whether or not the people close to them actually value them. It's really, really sad. The reality of the situation is if she valued herself properly, or she realized that her husband actually thought highly of her on a regular basis, then she wouldn't have to worry about that. However, it's kind of interesting, within the context of their relationship, they had really good sexual compatibility, but they had low emotional compatibility. So she actually was not, her TE inferior was not getting the, thoughtful, I think highly of you speech that she would like to hear from her husband, because he was a fellow TE user. And at times they would compete for status. And because of that competition for status, I'm not saying it's entirely her fault here in this case, but she definitely is the one who went way too far with it. But had he been able to meet her emotional needs by being thoughtful towards her and telling her that I think highly of you, then perhaps she wouldn't have been so worried about whether or not he valued her, right? Because he was always thoughtful, who would always be thoughtful towards her. See, that's the thing. You got to be really careful when it comes to your relationships, because if you are in a relationship with somebody who has the same thinking or judging functions that you have, well, there could either be competition for status or competition for recognition, or thoughtlessness, or perceived carelessness, which is not really there. And if you folks have a bad habit of poor communication like they absolutely had, then you find yourself in these situations. You find yourself in situations where it's like, oh crap, I'm really worried about whether or not my husband actually values me, and then as a result, I'm going to be disloyal to him, and then try to get in a relationship with Chase, ultimately hoping my NI child could potentially break up his marriage, and my marriage is obviously already falling apart, right? Because I'm so worried about whether or not my husband actually values me and whatnot, and then, maybe we can get something there. Yeah, no. Yeah, I definitely cut that person out of my life, but this is what happens, right? And it's all coming down to worry, which ends up causing the SI critic, the critic function, which is where a person's wisdom exists, right? It causes it to become foolish. And because of that foolishness, she became disloyal to her husband because of that foolishness. And if she just wasn't worried about whether or not her husband actually valued her, then none of this would happen. And she'd still be my friend and in my life, but she's no longer my friend or in my life anymore because of this moral failure. That's right, folks. F.E. nemesis, F.E. villain. Worry about what other people value. Worry about other people's moods. Worry about whether or not people care about them literally causes the ISFP to have moral failures on their own, and they become hypocrites, literally guilty of the thing that they're trying to avoid. Hashtag self-fulfilling prophecy. Wow. But how to solve that problem? Well, stop being worried about how other people perceive you, whether or not other people value you. Because if you know for a fact that you are not being impulsive, if you know for a fact that you are not being a burden, if you know for a fact that you're making decisions based on whether or not something works and not necessarily the brand or the status per se, and you're actually being as real as possible and not being all about the perception that other people have and trying to keep up appearances, if you let go of the appearances for the sake of reality, then people can see you as someone who's reliable. People will come to you. They want to hear your opinion. People will value, and you will know. You will feel, you will believe for a fact that those people will always value, just as I know for a fact her husband will always value her, right? And then as a result of that, the ISFP realizes it's wise for them to be loyal to those people because they understand that when they are investing, because, remember, they're Wayfarer type, SFPs are Wayfarer types. Wayfarer types, out of all the types, need to have relationships with people based on a portfolio. And this portfolio is, okay, I have this relationship here, 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 I have this relationship here. I've made a lot of investments in all these people. Well, this guy over here, I'm getting less out of it than what I put in. This person over here, I'm getting the same that back from them that I put in. And this person over here, I'm getting far more in return than what I'm putting in for them. Gosh, I wish the ISFP would stop living the moment so much and realize and remember all of the good things that was given to them. Gee, I wonder if that woman actually remembered all of the good things that her husband has actually done for her. Maybe all the times that he's sacrificed himself for her sake. It would be nice if she actually would remember all of those efforts that he did for her sake. Maybe, she wouldn't become so worried about whether or not he actually values her because she'd actually remember, but she lives in so much in the moment. She needs to be consistently reminded over and over and over, as if her soul is a black hole, right? A black hole that constantly needs to be filled over and over because, man, I can't remember. That's not fair. See, that's not fair at all. And then she just imagines that, this is a form of narcissism. Think about that. She just imagines that, because I don't remember, it's not true. Or because I haven't talked about it. Well, it must not be real. It must not be true. That's the thing about ISFPs. You really want to learn how to get ISFPs. You want to learn how to control ISFPs. You really want to know. Other than the risk of public shaming, you get them to admit things. You get them to talk about things because as they talk about things, it becomes real. And then they realize it's their responsibility to actually fix those things. Because if you don't get them to talk about it, then it's not real, you see? And that's the thing, you have to do that because the ISFPs forget. So here's the thing, ISFPs, You got to stop being afraid about whether or not your opinion. If you're in an intimate relationship with somebody, or even if you're in a business relationship with somebody like a business partner or your boss, you have to have the guts to actually talk about it. Even if you find yourself obligated and being responsible to fix a problem that you yourself caused. Because if you don't talk about it, it will literally cause you to become foolishly disloyal in a situation, and you end up creating a self-fulfilling prophecy that gets your ass divorced, or fired, or abandoned. Aren't you guys really afraid of being abandoned, right? Or having all of your status ripped away from you, or better yet, publicly shamed. Publicly. By C.S. Joseph. See what I'm saying, guys? Like, don't do that. Instead, have self-respect and make sure that you're going out of your way to at least remember, because it's wise to remember all the good things that people do for you so that you can be grateful and show gratitude. If you're showing gratitude to people, what business do you have being worried about whether or not someone values you? What business do you have? Show gratitude. It's one of the biggest problems ISFPs have. They are just ungrateful. And sometimes they can take things for granted that they shouldn't. When the reality of the situation is they should be on their knees in tears, thanking the people in their life for being there for them. When they constantly forget all those good things that those other people do for them on a regular basis. It's really frustrating. But if they understand that if they just show gratitude, that's all I have to do. Perform gratitude, show gratitude constantly, all the time. Make it a habit. It doesn't have to be like this thing like, that they have to force themselves to remember because they're super forgetful. They understand. But as long as they are showing gratitude, immediate gratitude, as immediate feedback to when someone does something nice for them and they're showing that gratitude, what business do they have to be worried about whether or not other people value them or not? Because showing gratitude is this exchange of value. If you give value, you will receive value back. Maybe this nemesis function exists to show the ISFP that they're not as giving as they believe themselves to be. And as soon as they come to realize that, as soon as they realize that they're not as giving, and they're more of a taker instead of a giver, if they devote themselves to being a giver in the moment when they do receive something good, that they give back either immediately or very shortly thereafter so that they don't forget, at that point, their introverted sensing critic will wake up and they will gain wisdom. Because by giving that positive feedback, by showing that gratitude, it is wise to do so. And it will protect them from those self-fulfilling prophecies that will cause them to end up in the ditch, abandoned where they belong, because they were ungrateful in the first place, right? Try to avoid that, right? And that's how you avoid that. And now, this particular ISFP, they're responsible and they're not a burden on other people. They have humbled themselves and are making decisions and no longer being impulsive and putting their status above other people. And they have a very strong voice and they're really hamming up that humility. And they realize the wisdom of showing gratitude to other people and being loyal to the idea of, and being loyal to other people in their life so that they don't have to worry about other people not valuing them because of gratitude they're showing on a regular basis. That's fantastic. And at last, they can begin developing their TI demon, where that thing that causes them to not actually know what the truth is, because it's not about what is true or false. It's all about what you believe. Well, that's your truth, bro, or that's my truth, yo. No, that's not really actually how it works, but for some reason they end up believing that's how life works. That's not the case. The thing is that an ISFP puts so much stock into the absolute good that they do not often realize that they are lacking in the absolute truth. Because the absolute truth and the absolute good both actually exist. Human beings need to get over that just one or the other exists. That's not actually true. They both exist simultaneously, folks. That's just the reality of the situation. But TI Demon, how to deal with TI Demon. The reason why you need to develop the TI Demon gateway is because guess what? Once you've achieved personal responsibility, once you've achieved personal humility, once you've achieved personal wisdom, the superego is at last finally willing to work with the other three sides of the mind, and this ISFP can become integrated and reach the highest level of enlightenment, such that their superego is no longer a demonic force, a source for evil, but it becomes a source of the ultimate good, a source of the absolute good, right? And it's able to do this through, you guessed it, self-mastery, which is achieved by turning their expert intuition trickster into a master function, a mastery function, where the NE becomes a responsible metaphysical force within the angelic side of the INTP superego instead of the demonic side of the INTP or superego, which comes as a result of hatred. So a person, so if you look at the hero function, the hero gateway is all about responsibility versus irresponsibility, right? The inferior function is all about fear versus faith, or faith in oneself, right? And then the villain function is all about one's worry versus someone's certainty. But the demon function is all about hatred or love, right? And this is where this actually comes from. And they can have the highest level, the highest absolute good, which is achievable by having absolute love as a result of their INTP superego coming to a point where it is an angelic force instead of a demonic force, and creates the mastery of the future. Kind of interesting how that works. But let's think about that. How many discoveries in engineering actually occurred as a result of ISFPs tinkering around? How much ISFP influence what put into the discovery of various forms of physics? How many ISFP discoveries have directly impacted nuclear fission, for example, and nuclear energy and nuclear power? How many of them? How many have gotten to that point, right? And you have to understand that the art that an ISFP creates is literally just a precursor to the ultimate method or the ultimate system that they're able to build with their ENTJ subconscious. But imagine if that ultimate method and that ultimate system literally changed the very fabric of the world as we know it, and the future of the world, and the entire fate of humanity itself is changed forever and ever as a result of this amazing feat of engineering, this amazing discovery that happened as a result of INTP superego. Let me tell you a great example from a fictional source, actually. A good example from a fictional source of INTP superego in its angelic form. There's a television show known as The Expanse. I love The Expanse. It is excellent. I believe it's in season 2 where we finally meet the man known as Solomon Epstein. Solomon Epstein is an ISFP, and he was tinkering around in his little ship in orbit of Mars. I believe he was in orbit of Mars. I could be wrong though, but I think he was a Martian. He was trying to just experiment around with his engine. He was really upset because of how engines for space travel within the solar system had a lack of fuel efficiency, right? And Solomon Epstein actually got to a point where, hey, I'm just going to toy around and whatnot. Well, guess what? He solved the fuel efficiency problem, and it gave birth to the Epstein drive, and it absolutely fundamentally changed humanity's ability to move throughout the solar system within this story. And every single ship is equipped with an Epstein drive because it's able to move a ship from one side of the solar system to another super quick, and with very little fuel use. So a lot of ships don't have to have so much fuel stored on themselves to be able to move from one place to another before needing to refuel again, and it was an absolutely fantastic discovery. As a result of his tinkering around and, realizing, hey, I shouldn't be impulsive, right? I should be, a little bit more responsible, and he wasn't a burden on other people. He had his wife and his kids and his family. He's taking care of his family. He's got it all figured out. He humbled himself and realized that he's not really that good at mechanics, but yeah, he just really wanted to solve this problem because he was getting really tired about having lack of fuel efficiency. He's like, I'm just going to try to figure it out. Who knows what will happen. I'm sure I can make at least some smidge of improvement. And then it made a huge improvement, just kind of like by a stroke of luck. Interesting how NI Child works that way, by a stroke of luck. And it's kind of like how INTP superego works in its angelic form, able to augment the divinity of the divine inner child of NI child and use its stroke of luck to all of a sudden make these fantastic engineering discoveries that change the fate of mankind forever. You know what I'm saying? But like, yeah, that's literally the entire process. And all it comes from is the TI demon letting go of its hatred. See, how does the TI demon become hateful? Well, it happens when the ISFP is not given a voice, when they're taken a voice, when they're told that their opinion is worth nothing, when people think less of them, when they're publicly shamed. It actually creates hatred. It's funny, like I've shamed so many TE inferiors in my life, and they hate me so much. I actually got a letter from a TE inferior, an INFP actually, who wrote me this huge letter about a year ago, telling me how my season 13 playlist on personal sovereignty and the mature masculine and feminine was sexist, it was misogynistic, I was chauvinist, I was an asshole, I didn't know what the fuck I was even talking about, like how dare you say these things, you don't care about women at all, you're a horrible person. And then just 2 weeks ago, I get an email from this woman apologizing and thanking me because, you know, my season 13 content got into the hands of her husband, of which he utilized season 13's content to publicly shame her to her family, and that's why she hated me so much, because she was publicly shamed. But then she realized, oh, you know, C.S. Joseph was actually correct. And I was right. You know, when T inferior is shamed, it creates hatred, right? But then after a while, she realized that I was actually speaking the truth. And she shouldn't be afraid of that truth. She should embrace that truth and reach that level of acceptance. And then it turned her TI demon into a TI angel, where she actually had love for what I was doing instead of hatred for what I was doing, because she realized it was the only way for her to truly actually benefit and actually grow for herself. And this is how she was able to get closer to self-mastery. This is exactly what Solomon Epstein did. He had no idea what the consequences were going to be when he started working on his Epstein drive, or the fact that it would be known as the Epstein drive. He was just trying to improve fuel efficiency a little bit better. But all of a sudden, boom, it was this amazing discovery, right? Here's another example from fiction. The ISFP Jed Clampett, of all people, from Beverly Hillbillies, that fantastic comedic film. And, him randomly discovering, black gold or oil, and he becomes like an oil tycoon, for example, right? This huge stroke of luck, right? It's kind of literally how extrovert intuition works when it's in its mastery form. And all an ISFP has to do to access that, all they have to do is let go of their hatred and realize that when they're shamed, that there's huge benefits. They have to ask themselves, why am I being shamed? Why do people think less of me? Did I actually perform a moral failure? Oh, I did. And then they talk about it. And then because they've admitted it, because they're talking about it, it becomes real to them all of a sudden. And then they have to take responsibility for their actions. Then they have to actually humble themselves. Then they actually have to be wise. Oh, crap. And now I'm changed. And now I'm better. And I'm on the path to enlightenment because I'm all about continuous improvement. As a result, I'm able to reach a level of self-mastery. And then, all of a sudden, they actually end up loving their critics and not hating their critics. Because it is written, do not correct a fool, lest you become one. If you correct a wise man, he will love you. But if you correct a fool, he will hate you. If you found this lecture useful, helpful, educational, enlightening, please subscribe. And remember, ISFPs, I seriously hope that you can maintain your path to continuous improvement, thus the path to enlightenment for yourselves and for others. Realize that, just go out of your way to not be a burden on other people. Stop being impulsive. Stop imagining that you have this unlimited luck. You can, but only after you've taken on your responsibilities, only after you've reached your humility, only after you've become wise. And then you can have that mastery where you can actually change fate itself, but for the rest of human beings. It's not necessarily about your fate. It's about everybody's fate. And it's that level of caring and that level of thoughtfulness that you guys can bring to the table, that level of love that you can bring to the table, that mankind around you will change forever and ever, and you will have a permanent gift, a permanent magnum opus, a permanent great work that the entire world will cherish, humanity will cherish for the rest of its existence. And you can give that gift to the world as long as you stay diligent instead of being idle. So anyway, folks, with that being said, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys tomorrow night.